He lost. James Damore lost. He was fired at Google for simply, he says, expressing his point of view, a conservative point of view, in which he outlined to some of his colleagues at work that Google was being unfair, questioned the role of biology in career choices, and some left-of-center biases that put conservative workers in some peril. The case was brought to the National Labor Relations Board, and it was there that the NLRB decided that he didn't have a case, that Google did, that his comments bordered on discriminatory, and that is why he was canned. James Damore is here right now. His attorney, Harmeet, Dhillon, are also here. Welcome to you both. I appreciate it.
Happy to be here, Neil.
All right, let's get to this a little bit, because there's so much to get into. And James, the first thing is, this started with you discussing among your colleagues points of view that were opposed to what? The way Google hired, the results of that hiring, political correctness. How would you describe it?
Yeah, it was partly just the shaming within the culture, and also discriminatory practices in hiring.
Now, there you had outlined biological differences between men and women and why there were so few female employees of equal stature to male employees. That's something that happens at a lot of companies. I believe 17% of the workforce at Google had women in such positions. When it came to leadership, fewer than 1 in 5 are women. How did you address that, or what did you say about that? Because the company says that you implied that women weren't up to that task biologically.
I simply use the psychological research to explain why there may be fewer women interested in current tech jobs, and how we could change those jobs to make them more welcoming to more women.
In saying that, you brought up, and you write very well, very clear, but you cited, among other reasons, that women might not have the temperament for moving beyond. You said neuroticism, higher anxiety, lower stress tolerance. This may contribute to the higher levels of anxiety that women report, and that the lower number of women in high stress jobs. Now, a lot of women got upset with that. That was obviously a deal changer for Google. What did you say when they questioned you about that?
This is a well-founded finding in psychology, that women report higher levels of stress on surveys. And Google was using that as evidence that women were being discriminated against. And I simply wanted to show that, no, women tend to experience more stress. And if we make the job just less stressful, less 80-hour weeks, then we can make it just more appealing to more women. All
right. Well, here's a chance I want to talk to your female lawyer. And maybe you can help me with this, Harmeet, because when the company CEO was asked about this during, I think, the Davos summit, he said, as a company, we support freedom of speech, but you have to understand in the context of the workplace, the representation of women is very, very low. It's a moral imperative that we create an environment that is more supportive of women. But he went on to say this was not a biological issue. This was, a fundamental issue. And the points that your client was making were deemed to be discriminatory. What do you think?
Well, Neil, there's no denying that there are differences between men and women. And so I think that's a legitimate point. A lot of social justice warriors in the workplace and outside don't want to accept that. But now the question is, how do companies deal with it? And James was trying to provide some constructive solutions. What Google does, and many companies do instead, is employ quotas to mandate the hiring of women, despite the fact that the pipeline coming out of our engineering institutions is only about 20% women today. We need to change that as a society if we want more women to have those jobs, but quotas are illegal under our employment laws. So while Google may prefer and have what they call a moral imperative, they also must abide by United States employment law, and there are employment discrimination laws that apply both at the federal level and in California that protect the rights of workers to comment about these issues and to not be discriminated against on the basis of their gender, their race, their
views,
political
right?
orientation,
in James's case,
or
James,
their viewpoint.
You believe it was your viewpoint, your conservative viewpoint, in what is deemed to be a liberal working environment that worked against you. Did you have any other instances of that where you felt ostracized or you were laughed at, picked on? I know the company did have to respond to an emailer who had threatened you, but did it go beyond that?
Yeah, there are many instances of shaming within our culture, and if you look through the lawsuit, there's hundreds of pages of this just repeated over and over. So I wasn't an isolated incident.
All right, so are there other conservative or right-leaning thinkers like yourself or workers who are afraid to speak up? And what is condoned versus what is not condoned?
Yeah, so recent surveys suggest about 80% of conservatives feel like they can't bring up social issues at work in Silicon Valley. And it's really unclear what exactly you can or can't say, which just adds to the chilling effect.
So when you said you couldn't come through with your views, but you still wrote what you wrote and shared with your colleagues what you shared with your colleagues, did you ever bounce it off your superiors first?
Yeah, I actually had many one-on-one conversations, and a manager actually suggested that I spread it further. So it wasn't clear that this was wrong at all, and it was only once it became viral that the company started responding and denouncing me.
All right, so the company was saying at the time to act as it did, and this was something echoed by the National Labor Relations Board to make the decision it did, is that employers must be permitted to nip in the bud, I think that would be you, the kinds of employee conduct that could lead to a hostile workplace rather than waiting until an actionable hostile workplace has been created before taking action. That, in other words, if your views were left to go unaddressed and by extension make women in this case feel uncomfortable, then that's reason enough for you to go. What do you say?
So, Neil, if I can address this issue about the National Labor Relations Board. First of all, James withdrew his National Labor Relations Board charge, and we're focusing on the class action lawsuit that we filed. So that is one misconstruction. The other is that the National Labor Relations Board...
They both take the same view on this particular... That's where they're coming. The other things
really
are raised with the company.
They really don't, actually. So the National Labor Relations Board, National Labor Relations Act, has a very limited scope. And what was being covered there was a concept called protected concerted activity. In our lawsuit, we talk about equal employment norms that are not covered or governed by the National Labor Relations Act. So longstanding precedent in the National Labor Relations Act has held that conduct like James's actually was protected. And at the regional level here in San Francisco area, the National Labor Relations Board had already decided to move forward with James's case. So then we had one lawyer in the National Labor Relations Board who wrote this memo. It's an advice memo. It's not a ruling. There was no evidence taken. There was no hearing, and nobody was sworn. So it's interesting that they released this thing a month after they wrote it. But James doesn't have a case in front of the National Labor Relations Board anymore, so I think it was kind of odd and gratuitous to do that. Google did lobby them to restrict worker rights, and they've done that in a number of different areas. So that's an ongoing thing that Google is doing.
All right, well, here's where we can help me with this, and maybe this is where you can help me, James, because the company seems to be saying right now that that this was something they thought long and hard over here, and that they didn't want to treat you unfairly, but they felt your comments left them no other choice. Quoting, and this is coming from the company today because we asked for a statement, that their HR manager saying that I want to make clear that our decision is based solely on the part of your post that generalizes and advances stereotypes about women versus men. It's not based in any way on the portions of your post that discuss the employee's programs or trainings. That again and again, when you differentiated between the capacity of men or women to handle the job, that's where you crossed a line. What do you say to that?
They really didn't think long and hard about this. After it went viral, they fired me the Monday right after that. And yeah, I repeat over and over in the document that we shouldn't stereotype people and that there's large distributions, but this is really important in just figuring out why we see certain trends. And
when you say why you see certain trends, just to be clear on this, if women want to understand why there's such a small percent of that workforce, and not only at Google, across the whole tech industry, and you cite some of these reasons, whether it's a temperament issue, whether it's just a biological issue, you could see how a company would respond to say, is this your thinking, that it's addressing other workers there? It says, is this your thinking, Google, that you agree with this?
I I mean, Google can have their own opinion on this, but I think that this is well-founded psychological research, and it really should be used if we want to improve the workplace.
So to address that, how would the numbers improve for more females in your industry at that former company and elsewhere across Silicon Valley?
If they use this and actually take advantage of it, then we can really make tech a more appealing place for women.
All right, but it isn't right now. And is it your sense that it should be equal? You should have the equal number of men and women, or is it just the nature of the beast that in this area it's going to be disproportionately men?
I think maybe it won't necessarily be equal number, but that doesn't mean that it should be built solely for men, and it should be welcoming both to men and women.
So when you're hearing this, Harmeet, I mean, as a woman, other women took offense to that. Not all. I want to stress, not all. Do you?
Not at all, Neil. I'm not threatened by different viewpoints being discussed. It seems like today everybody's a snowflake and can't hear a different viewpoint. I think that, women should be free to make their own choices, and that's what they're doing here. And there was an interesting, some discussions came out over the weekend. Some studies have shown that in countries where women actually have more choices, like the United States, there are fewer women in tech. Women have a lot of different choices in this country, whereas in some more repressive countries, which are more limited, a lot of Middle Eastern and even where I come from in India, women have very much fewer choices in the career workplace, and so they're limited to certain respectable occupations. And so what James was trying to do in his memo is point out how Google could do a better job of attracting women and make it more attractive to women, not by using quotas and by shaming and degrading men and booing them at company-wide meetings, which has been done by female executives at Google, but rather follow the law and make it more attractive. And that's a market-based solution. I think those of us who are more conservative believe in market-based solutions. Google is failing in the marketplace of being attractive to women. Google should be welcoming to opportunities
well,
to
they
change
say
for the
they
better
are.
so
This
that
is
women
not a
flock to
political
Google.
matter to them. And then just quoting from their statement here to me, and James, I want you to answer to this. They argue again and again in the statement that this had nothing to do with your political viewpoints, saying having a different political view is absolutely fine. Advancing gender stereotypes is not. Your reaction?
They can claim that it wasn't about politics, but we see time and again that they make politically motivated actions, and this wasn't an isolated incident.
When you say not an isolated incident, now we're told that in Silicon Valley and in the high-tech world in general, that to mention even the president's name or Republicans in general is verboten. It's a career risk. Was it? Is it?
Yes, that's the general sentiment. You don't know anyone that voted for Trump because no one is willing to admit that they did. And it's really unfortunate that people can't bring their whole selves to work.
Were there quiet closet Trump voters who just were cheering you on?
Yes, there were many people that showed their support privately, but told me that they really weren't willing to show any public support because they too feared that they would get fired.
Was it your view after all of this, where they say your views, particularly regarding women, were an anathema to the company, that you were almost treated as some sort of a right-wing kook? Did that bother you?
Yes, they definitely tried to smear me as some misogynist, racist, crazy person. And I was really just trying to improve the workplace. So it's really unfortunate. I felt betrayed by them.
So what do you do
Neil,
now?
if I could,
What do you guys do now? I know you separately, you did this NLRB thing as one issue, but where do you go? Where do you go with this now, Harmeet?
We have this lawsuit pending, and we have been contacted by literally dozens and dozens of people. It's like overwhelming number of people calling our office wanting to join the lawsuit. People who didn't get jobs at Google, and they believe it's on the basis of their gender, race, or political orientation, and people who are discriminated against, terminated, or otherwise.
How would their political, affiliations come up? I guess if you're Google, you know.
You would Google them, obviously.
Right.
It does come up in interviews, and it does come up. It's readily available to people. And, we have numerous examples of people who have been stopped during the interview process because of their background and their viewpoint. And so this is a pervasive problem. I mean, Google is definitely the worst offender, but there are other companies in Silicon Valley with similar issues.
But if you went to a left-wing rally, or let's say you went to a Hillary Clinton rally, or whatever, a Free the Internet rally, or whatever is big, you would not be held accountable for that, or you would not be punished for that. Is that what you're saying, Jen?
To the contrary, you would actually be welcomed more because it is a social justice warrior dominated workplace at Google.
James, is it a good company? Do you think Google is a good company?
And they make good products, but I think it's becoming more and more hostile to work there if you have conservative viewpoints.
What if you're a woman? Is it a hostile work environment?
I think it's actually very welcoming to women. And it's not this tech bro culture that people make Silicon Valley out to be.
All right. Very interesting, guys. Keep us posted on this startling story. A little more to this.